Picture yourself for a moment a fisherman, or a UK fisherman in 2016. Your industry is, well, it's pretty much dying off. Industrialization is changing the complete scene of fishing. Much of the emphasis of the actual boat doing the fishing is now being changed from the actual catching of the fish to the processing, and the on-land facilities of that fish processing have become far more important than certainly the actual catching of them. That tends to be where the money came from. And of course, you're competing against bigger trawlers, most of them financed by a lot bigger companies, and certainly far bigger, and can do far, far more. In fact, those big trawlers can do pretty much in a day what it takes your small boat to do in a month. So, how would you then feel knowing that the reality is that your industry is changing? You're stuck. There's been no investment from the government. The UK government has been not interested in listening to your industry. Like I say, the fishing industry is worth less than sort of 1% of the UK economy. Um, you're not getting a lot of attention. And then, of course, along comes Mr. Shiny Nigel Farage, saying he's standing up for fishermen, saying all the things that you've been trying to say for years. What do you think? And which way, the direction do you think the fishermen were going to go? I've said it before. Look, fishermen were just as lied to as anyone else in the country who now feels like they were lied to about Brexit. And today, we've got an exact story about that. Of a fisherman who was even met by Boris Johnson, said that now he was lied to by Boris Johnson. And one of the things I have said would be increasingly interesting and would be an incredible blow, not only to the Brexiteers, but a massive boon to us when we again start to sort of, start on the eventual path, back to rejoining the EU, is getting the fishermen on side. Leave's biggest asset. Imagine instead a flotilla of fishing boats going down the Thames, all tied with EU flags, saying, "We want back in the EU. We want back in the common fisheries policy. We were lied to by the Brexiteers. It's time to undo that mistake." That is an incredibly powerful image, and it is one we should work towards. But that's another story. And of course, today we're going to go over this because this is very, very even more interesting, because fishermen are turning against Brexiteers, and this is going to get good. Because, as I've said, if you're a fisherman and you see Nigel Farage now, you probably want to throw a bucket of fish all over him, because he is the most prime candidate who has lied to you. And like I said, he would. The second he achieved his objective, got out of the EU, he has dropped completely any notion of supporting fishermen whatsoever. He has been completely absent. He hasn't even been near a fishing boat since that time. So let's go cracking on into this. But before we do that, of course, as always, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, do remember to ring the bell as well so you get notifications. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can all buy me coffee. And of course, there is the YouTube thank you button. And of course, the Pony Club down below as well. So, as always, let's crack on with today's story, shall we? So, this comes from the iNews with the title of "I Was Lied to by Boris Johnson. Why so much of the UK's fishing is still waiting for a Brexit boost. Fish merchant Ian Perkins won't forget the day he met Boris Johnson. It was the 23rd of August 2019, and the MP, less than a month into his spell as Prime Minister, was on an unannounced visit to the South Devon fishing town of Brixham. It was a typical rambunctious performance from Johnson, extolling the virtues of Brexit and the huge benefits it was going to bring to the UK, not least to the folks of this small but important UK fishing town. Mr. Perks, who has been running his fish merchant business in the town since 1976, sat down with the PM just after Mr. Johnson had shelled out £7.75 for some fish and chips on the picturesque harbour. He went, Me and my son Joshua chatted with Boris for about 10 minutes, he recalls. He promised us that we would need to expand our premises and employ more staff. He told us that when Brexit rules came in on January 2021, we would be so busy that we would be able to take the fish off the French and they would be desperate to buy them from us. He said we could look forward to a very, very prosperous future. Mr. Roll, and of course, Roll awarded 3.5 years later, and Mr. Perk's revenue is 30% down. Every time we cover a business, it is reaching that amount. They've roughly, we've seen more in some cases, we've certainly seen a lot more in other cases, but the average is starting to become very clear. Businesses are losing on an average of 30% of their revenue because of Brexit, because they cannot export, or is becoming a lot more difficult to export. They're having to spend even more money on exporting, so it's costing them revenue. And this is the very picture that is building with businesses. Anyway, continues. Ian Perkins says that Boris Johnson lied to him about the benefits of Brexit. He had run his business profitably for 45 years before the post-Brexit fishing rules came into force in January of 2021. Now he's having to completely give up entirely on exports, which was accounted for 85% of his pre-Brexit sales, and axing up to a dozen of his 15 staff. Again, I can only sympathize, but like I say, we can say to people like this guy, we warned you what the consequences would be, and we're glad that you now admit that you were lied to. Let's turn this around, and certainly start to speak out against people like Boris Johnson, these other Brexiteers, who, let's be honest, Ian, used you. They didn't care about fishing; they used you. And then the second they were done with you, they got rid of you because you were just a really handy scapegoat for them. But anyway, he says, I was brainwashed by Boris, he says. I voted for Brexit because we were told it would deliver for us. And I was told again in August of 2019 by Boris Johnson when he came here. I got it wrong. There are no positives of Brexit for us. We will have to go down to just 3 or 4 staff if sales continue like they did last year. We've made a loss for the past 3 months, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any better. We'll be left with just 15% of the business we do in the UK because Boris lied to us, and Brexit ruined our export business. What we were warning of these fishermen, what were we saying? 85% of all fish is exported to the continent. We do not eat fish in the UK. That is, I've tried to make it very, very plain and clear. We do not eat fish in the UK. As he said there, only 15% of his business is actually selling to the UK. The rest was all exports. We do not eat fish in the UK, but they do in Europe. And that's where it is. And because of this, because of all the new rules, they've now been essentially sacrificed, and they were used as convenient props. But back to it. So as the fishing merchant, Mr. Perkins' business is now subject to a 4-fold increase in fees for the export and health certificates needed to transport fish to the continent, from about £60 per shipment pre-Brexit to now £240 now. On top of that, there are customs charges of £250 each time he sends fish through Calais and onwards to the final destination, whether that be in France, Spain, or elsewhere in Europe. My costs have increased to £2,000 to £3,000 a week since Brexit, said Ms. Perkins, and we also faced increased competition from all over the world when it comes to buying the fish from the market. The Branksome Banksy, the fishermen in the southwest, say that they would, quote, let them eat fish if they were not banned from catching some breeds for the rest of Europe of trawlers that can. But the competition has been Brixham's thriving fish market. They used to get to operate. Lots of local traders would arrive, take a look at the fish, and bid for what they wanted to sell on to buyers both home and abroad. We used to just touch the fish and we find the best fish and bid for it, said Mr. Perkins. But since Brexit, the auction is now all online and we have to compete with merchants across Europe, even in Asia. There are other positive fishing stories in Brinksome, with trawlers seeing the likes of the Dover sole or even ray, commonly known as scale, selling at better prices. However, many other fishing businesses in the southwest are like Mr. Perkins, still waiting for the benefits of Brexit to come through. And across the River Tama into Cornwall, local fishing fleets are particularly feeling hard done by over their ongoing ban on the sprue dog fishing. Better known to fish and chips as the rock salmon, stocks of the small species of the shark were believed to have fallen over 90%, and of course, the Cornish have been banned from catching them since 2010. Newly fisherman Phil Mitchell has spent 12 years working with scientists proving the abundance of the sprue dog, but the government has failed to agree a deal with the EU to lift the ban on him, and many like him are catching it again. The French, the Irish, and the Spanish can all work away, and we're still dumping loads of dead sprue dogs, said Mr. Mitchell. It is unbelievable. The government argues that the UK fishing industry will be £34 million better off this year, following a deal struck at the end of 2022 that brought the total value of the fishing quote opportunities secured for the UK fleet to £750 million since Brexit. However, much of the increase in quotas apply to UK fishermen in the north of England, where there is plentiful supply of cod and haddock. Chris Redford, the chief executive of the Cornish Fish Producers Organisation, argues that the Southwest has been left behind by the government. Well, the sort of end of the year headlines that the government likes to announce, he says. In reality, we found that the Southwest was actually had £2 million loss of fishing opportunities since there were in 2021. Even a former Cornish environmental minister is now criticising the Brexit deal he backed when Mr. Johnson was in cabinet. George Eustace was in charge of the fishing industry when he was, until Mr. Johnson's downfall last year, Secretary of State for Food and Rural Affairs. He now says that he believes the Brexit fishing deal should have been better negotiated by Lord Frost. As we said before, we were constantly banging on just how bad that was. But of course, they were all backing it because they were desperate to get Brexit done because they had no idea. And now they've created even more problems for themselves, which will have even more knock-on effects, creating even more problems that they don't even know how to solve themselves. But the UK's former chief negotiator for exit to the European Union during the Brexit negotiations in 2019, and then, of course, the chief negotiator for Task Force Europe until he resigned in December of 2021. Lord Frost was reluctant to make any concessions, and in the end, it all happened in the final few days, said Mr. Eustace, of the fishing deal with the EU. It did not serve as well, leaving fisheries until the very end. I think it would have been better had it been addressed early in the negotiations. On the wall behind Ian Perkins, processing units in the harbour is under a Banksy mural titled "Let Them Eat Fish." But many fishermen in the southwest might point out that they need to be allowed to catch fish before people can actually eat them. The Department of Rural Environmental Affairs was contacted with comment. And of course, Brinksome's fish market enjoyed a record trading last year in 2022. With a strong fishing tradition dating back to the 14th century, Brinksome is credited with being one of the birthplaces of trawling. In the 19th century, it was recorded that Brinksome had over 270 sail operators decked from trawlers employing over 1,600 seamen, making it the largest fishery in England. Is this going to tell you about? So yeah, it doesn't really tell you too much, Alex. Just a bit about the town. Other than that, again, fishermen, they're not really doing that well. We've said it before. This is why last year we sort of didn't do too much coverage of, fishermen. Nothing had changed. They're still, as you can see, worse off. And I've said before, certainly the rejoin elements should now certainly look at trying to sort of ally themselves with the fishermen and go, hey, look, we know the EU wasn't perfect, but look, it was people like Farage who were meant to be in charge of, you guys, helping you do a better deal, but never did. He just stood up in Parliament and just spouted off nonsense. And then out of the 62 meetings that are about these, fishermen, he went to one and then never turned up to the rest. And yet, if any MP actually did that, there would be a massive outcry. It would be a massive scandal. But no, because it was in sort of the European Parliament, no one cared, unfortunately. But that's a sort of another, I suppose, lesson we'll have to learn because of this. So, as always, unfortunately, UK fishermen are still very, very much suffering from, well, regret. As you can see here, you've got a guy who's pretty much lost almost all his business. I suppose you don't know what else to say, but I'm sorry, dude. I'm sorry you're having such a bad time with your business. I'm sorry you've had to lay people off, because obviously you've got to have some sympathy. Those people might not have being able to get a job as quickly as possible. Who knows what happens to them, given the sort of economic situation we're in now, and especially sort of the town, that area that it's in. It's it's not going well for them. Like I say, they were warned, they were told about it, and now they're suffering from the consequences, and now they're complaining about it, and certainly some are starting to wake up about it. So, as always, guys, thank you very much for watching, and of course, we'll see you all next time.